name's Glyn Pooley and I'd like to talk about art. This time my subject is right back in the Middle Ages in Japan with the tradition of these fantastic gardens. They've been reproduced all over the world and of course there's been many attempts to create them right here where we live now. But I've included it because they are at the essence of the whole. They've had such a big influence on Japanese art. And what we're looking at here is something that is coming out of the system of what we would call Zen. Japanese traditions were deeply linked with traditions that come from China, and they kind of developed their own unique blending, Zen being one of them. Zen was basically come out of the Chinese Buddhist system called Chan, which was the big way, if you like. But Zen has got its Japanese characteristic, which we'll look at, and it develops into its other unique system as well, called Shintoism. And the emphasis they bring to their sensibility permeates all of Japanese art. So what you're seeing here is something that would fundamentally keep reappearing, assessing traditional Japanese art, and this is this term wabi-sabi. It's a very difficult term to concisely put into Western terminology, but I've just put a couple of words in brackets thinking about it. Wabi is a refined austerity, paring something down right to its essence, as you can see here with the stones. And sabi is this subdued taste that comes from deep meditation on something specific. So he said this is a Zen garden, and the essence of Zen is meditation to calm the mind through experience, and then with a little bit of luck reach a state of enlightenment, free from all suffering. What a lovely thought. And to be able to put that down and portray that in a garden setting and then in their artworks is a real gift. So you're looking at certain components that are included here. What's interesting is that the garden fundamentally is in the forefront, this side of the wall, if you like, but it's also connected with the greater garden. So, we're using the term interconnected here. The refined area, austerity, is the foreground that is in the contained part of the garden, and that's in contrast to what is beyond, but they're interconnected. And what is beyond, of course, we've got elements of the wisteria and the cherry blossom, which are again fundamental to Japanese art because they are concerned with transience. Transience appears again and again in the process of understanding Japanese art. It's a fundamental Buddhist ground root, if you like. So the component elements, of course, are the rocks, which are carefully chosen, the moss, which is around them, and then the gravelled area. So if you like, the rocks would represent the mountains, mountainous regions, and then the gravelled area would, or the moss would be the land, lower land, and then the gravelled area would be something vast like the sea. And they're these fine pebbles or stones, often daily manicured. You can see patterns running through them by the Zen monks in a clear state, stillness of their mind. And what they're really interested in is the relationship between the component parts. So it's the space between these elements. And you'll see this when they represent their pictorial images as we develop through the presentation. But just by even gazing at this image, there's a certain stillness that seems to be kind of emanating from it. So you can imagine actually being in its presence. That creates something deep that goes inside the active participant that's reflecting on it, and then there's this engagement. So that's wabi sabi, although as we said it's going to appear over and over. And if we look how that kind of manifests in the way they create other gardens, if you like, less austere, the wabi aspect of it, you come to another fundamental aspect of Japanese culture, and that is a balance. That's yin and yang. Yin is the feminine energy, as they see, and yang is the male energy. So the feminine energy in this case, of course, is the greenery, the soft, the plants, and the male energy is the rocks, okay? And often you'll find a bridge between, and it is a bridge between that connects those two aspects and also links them together, because it's about the balance between the two. And it's balance which kind of deeply rooted in this Japanese culture, and deeply rooted in the way they arrange space, and as you'll see, the way they arrange their paintings is clearly defined. It's coming out of a deep sense of stillness and appreciation of the process. You can see it here, how the interconnected quality is kind of developed. We've got this beautiful link between the outside and the interior, and the interconnected quality between them. We've got symbols in the outside of the masculine stones with the feminine support around it, but we've also got this other element which appears often in Japanese art, and that's these screens. Okay, now these screens are something which they paint on, okay, but they're used in a way that controls space. They control interior space and sometimes exterior space. They're lightweight and they're movable, so they can place them in different parts of the room. Now, why would you want to move a screen or place it in different parts? They do it to direct certain energies, yin and yang energies. You might have heard of feng shui, which is about balance. It's about moving energies, or in this case, they like to move the wind. Sounds incredible, doesn't it? But it's about moving natural forces around internal spaces, linking them with external spaces, so there's balance and there's stillness, and that enables them then to create this great resonance in the art. So the screens, as well as framing the outside world here, they're an integral part of creating that wind, or that movement, and that cleansing quality that comes from the wind's ability to lighten up the soul in this case. And then you've got this other aspect as well. You see how we're putting component aspects together. You've got the screen on the right hand side in this room. We've got a very balanced interior space. We've got geometrical shapes which are about balance, but they're also about symbolically cyclical nature of existence, big thinking, hence the circle, and the unified quality of everything, interconnected quality of everything. And then they've brought nature inside with the bonsai tree, which, you know, in the West we try and emulate that a little bit more now, although I've tried on a number of occasions to try and grow a bonsai, not very successfully, never in this kind of incredible league that you're seeing here. Often they're lime trees or something, but they are, You know, you're talking a tree like this, probably 500 years old, incredibly manicured and balanced, with an incredible attention to detail again. But it's an attention to detail from a certain mindset. It's a mindset of meditative, deep connection and stillness. So the whole process is the important aspect. So you've got nature being brought inside, space is being controlled and defined by the screens, and everything is about balance and stillness. Wonderful combination. As you have with this other tradition, Ikebana, this is fundamentally flower arranging, but there's a certain Japanese style to this. When we look at this image, it almost looks like a painting, doesn't it? Everything is so balanced, but the important aspect again of it is the space between the component parts. So when they're pruning the plant, in this case, they're seeing what kind of spaces are created. Often this is in 2D, but taking 360 degrees. So the relationship of the space between the leaves, the branch, the fruit, the flower is the aspect that creates that big thinking. It creates that large space. It creates enough space for when you contemplate on it, you become still. That's the aspect. So everything is balanced, enable for the participant to become still. You also might have heard of the Japanese tea ceremony. Same kind of thing. Everything is done very methodically in a way that one thing is built on top of the next so that you create this deep stillness within, and then you get that austere beauty of the wabi aspect of wabi-sabi coming through. And here we've got a number of these different aspects pulled together. You know, we've got the ikebana of the flowers being arranged. We've got the bonsai. What an incredible bonsai tree this is. Creating a space with the screens, so everything is balanced and harmonious. And when you engage with this through meditation, you can become still, because meditation is about a consistent stillness. Zen Buddhists are after a consistent stillness. So without distraction, everything is about containing to a certain point that enables you to then become one with yourself. Everything is in ourselves, but slowing it down to that stillness is the essence of Zen Buddhism and Buddhism, which is at the core of these kinds of balancing processes, and the art form manifests that. So you see, when they move to the 2D, this is an example going back 1595, at more or less the time of the garden, the Japanese Zen garden was kind of put together. You see, we have other qualities coming through. We've got stillness, we've got space, but you see how they've painted on this screen. Of course, this screen can operate as a concertina shape, an L shape, all kinds of shapes when you look at it. So it's almost like a bit of three-dimensional sculpture, but it's moving the elements around the room, so that impacts on the way you're viewing the piece. And you put together certain elements. We've got the balance between the nature, which is something which is deeply ingrained in their Shinto tradition, a deep reverence for nature, and space. Okay, so one of the other fundamental understandings, if you like, is this term Wu Wei. Now, Wu Wei, fundamentally, I put in brackets there, inaction. It is action through inaction. Now, that sounds a little bit strange to Western ears, but basically, it's not total inaction. It is if you like, tuning in and working with nature. It's about not getting in the way. So, hence the Zen Buddhism's stillness and the deep connection enables you then to really, really appreciate the essence, in this case, of the tree or the sky, really appreciate its characteristics, and then you work with it. You don't try and control nature, you try and understand it in all its aspects, and then you work with it so the flow comes through. In essence, that's Wu Wei, and the Zen practitioner, they try and work with that aspect in all aspects of their life so that they mindfully move through their day-to-day life in a state of working with any specific situation. So, to be able to put that down in an art form creates, such a radiant beauty, but it's a still beauty. And hence the stillness is being created by, in this case, at this stage, very few colors as well. And you see this tradition start to develop. So in this one, there's another large screen, similar time. You've got, again, the combination of nature, water, rocks, mountains. But see how they're component images? They're like the Roger garden. They're all there, but they have a relationship with each other, and usually slightly separated relationship. And they give that reverence, what I was talking about, like in the Ikebana, of creating space. They give the reverence here and mark out that space with the gold leaf. So that's how important it really is, We don't really have traditions like this in the West. The closest thing that we come to, I suppose, is the icon painting, where if you think how those images are made up, those Christian icons, Madonnas, etc., and how they use the gold leaf usually to frame the Madonna and to put into the background as a mark of sacredness, you can see how it kind of slightly overlaps from that perspective. But the Western tradition, using egg tempera, etc., is made on solid bits of heavy oak, whereas here they're primarily made on silk, something which is soft, something which is portable. But if it's well looked after, it lasts years and years and years, and it's easy to repair, of course, if it does get damaged. And this other beautiful one from the Edo period, it just shows those component parts being placed, one in then the space, and then the next, and then the space, the balance, and the hills, the bigness of the distance, the foreground, the sea, all beautifully rendered in a crisp line in this case. And you can see how it creates a certain, what we start to see as a Japanese style. Relatively few colors being used, a muted kind of quite tonal picture, but supported by a beautiful subdued gold leaf, again on the panels. And then in this one, this is an insight into the Shinto tradition, where for them, nature, every aspect of nature is animate. It has its own force, whether it be a waterfall, whether it be a certain tree, or in this case, you can see wind gods and thunder gods. Everything is interconnected and has a certain power and has a certain kind of reverence. If you connect with, that aspect will come through into your artwork. It's a holistic approach, but it's seen from deep contemplation on these different aspects. And in this one, we see those different component parts placed together. And as the tradition develops, we have this other characteristic, whereas what you're seeing in Japanese art that was different to the direction Western art went in. Western art from Renaissance times moved itself forward from this idea of creating illusionistic space, 1-point perspective, 2-point perspectives, to create, a certain view that maybe the eye would see receding into a great distance. Whereas Japanese art, as you see, is creating very flat planes like icon painting, flat planes which then are kind of utilized with the different component aspects. But they also develop a sense of this movement, this feng shui, and they often use a diagonal to move from one aspect to the other. So, you've got a self-contained area, in this case with the trees, the greenery and the water, but then using the diagonal, it takes you to the other area, or vice versa, back up there, or in this direction from this scenario of this little elements which are being played out, this drama moves diagonally up to this one and diagonally back up through to that. It's just a device which enables one aspect to move towards the other, but again they're separate elements, but they're linked together, and the space of the neutral tone is there, really refined. And as well as those color images, which we'll look at a little bit more, you've got these sumi ink paintings, which is like a fluid black ink that is used often on silk in a certain kind of way. Tremendous skill to sum up something. This is of Bodhidharma, the Buddhist monk. Is said is deep influence in Chinese and in Japanese culture. It's about when you reach enlightenment or get close to that stage, you might have moments of it. You can put something down of such great universal connection relatively quickly, within a few minutes. So if you like, you train for 30 years to put the essence down in 30 seconds. That's when the enlightenment had arisen. And they're using very fluid and ethereal materials for that. The fluidity of the ink on the delicate quality of this silk. But the brush marks are put down with great precision. I had a Chinese friend who studied through the academies there, and she said they studied from the age of 5 to 15 to 10 years to be able to put some of these fundamental marks down with a fluidity that was considered correct. Seems incredible to work on something so deep and profound for so long, to be able to say something so specific. But that's at the essence Chinese and hence Japanese art culture. Here we have a ukiyo-e. I keep saying E, but it's A. Ukiyo-e print. 1793. These were woodblock prints. 3 beauties. We've got 3 beauties there. And they move between each other again with that triangular quality or the diagonal quality, and the space is revealed between them. This is another tradition, again in the Japanese culture, of the geisha. The geisha is, and it's a very rare now, revered element of Japanese culture, where everything that a geisha does is considered and mindfully presented to enhance the culture or the environment in which they inhabit, whether they're pouring tea, the way they're dressed, whether they walk through the park in a certain way. They emanate this Japanese, sometimes delicate but ethereal, but at the same time substantial reverence for this austere beauty. It's about almost like they become like the feng shui as they move through a space. Hence they're revered so highly. at this particular time. As I say, they're rare in Japan now because Japanese culture's gone in another way, which we'll touch on later. And here another print of 1857. We all know Hokusai's print of the wave, which we've looked at, but Hiroshi, here we have again the essence of Zen. Sudden shower over the bridge, Shinhoashi. What we've got is the elements being portrayed. It's a sudden shower. Something's happened in a moment, beautifully portrayed, and the figures stagger across the bridge. You know, we talked about the bridge appearing in their gardens and their art form again, taking us from one element to the other, from one place to another, this transformative process. And then something from the natural world just happens in an instant. Japanese like that, instant quality, which comes after many, many years of deep reflection. These prints were mass-produced woodblock prints, which often was given or sold to tourists that went to Japan at these particular periods. And then when they came out, they heavily influenced Western art, Western painting that we saw in the late 1880s, 90s. People like Van Gogh, as well as the other post-impressionists, were so impressed by this work because it saw Western imagery from a completely different perspective that influenced their painting. And then here we've got an example of the sumi brush technique in what we call Nihonga, which is just basically means Japanese style. What you're seeing here is this real fluidity on the silk of the artist having to sum up essences, sum up, in this case, mountains, trees, and water from the Shinto tradition, and just capture them with these beautiful hake brushes, where everything is economically put down, one layer on top of the other layer. Takes some practice. You know, the themes that we keep talking and reappearing in this Japanese art are there. The vastness of the mountains again. Japanese, there's a lot of nature in Japan. It's ironic, really, in some respects, because they've kept a lot of it natural, but they have some of the most densely populated cities in the world. I think Tokyo must have 40 million, something like that. It is phenomenal, the density of their cities, and that's mainly because of their reverence for nature. They make sure they keep other aspects of nature clear and intact. I know there's been divergences, but from their culture, that's one of the things which they've been very strong with. See the beauty and reverence for nature there. And in this one, you've got that combination of beauty and reverence for nature, but the connection, the Shinto element of animism. You've got symbolic element of the tiger, which in Japanese tradition would be what we call a yang energy, a male energy. Water being female energy, but you can see how they echo each other. You know, the shape and the form in the tiger is being echoed and reflected in the water. And then the other element which appears often in Japanese art, which they've taken from Chinese tradition, of course, is a dragon in the sky. It's a symbol of the heavens. It's a symbol of something beyond, again, big and vast. And this is an image in the Nihonga style of a group of artists that were on the Azura coast, and you start to see color being engaged more and more in this process now. We can talk a little bit about how, if you like, this painting technique is created. This is a good example of the Nihonga style. On these flat boards, often screen, but the two preferred surfaces for Japanese art are silk screen, which we've looked at, and handmade Japanese paper, which is a very dense paper. It's a very tough paper. And then it's kind of primed. The pigments which are used in Japanese Nihonga painting are fundamental, really. They're like crushed rocks and minerals, just like the old cavemen would use. But they crush them down in certain ways to different densities. So if you like one color, say it was lapis, which is a blue, would be crushed into different densities of high density, medium, and looser density. And what that does, it gives you three different colors. It gives you a dark blue for the high density, a medium blue for middle aspect, and then a lighter blue for the rock which is less crushed. So they can layer one on top of the other, and then they'll use what can we say, an animal glue to put that together, to bind that together, paint that over. That kind of link binds the pigment down, and they paint that over a surface sometimes that they paint a white surface over everything, which is in like traditionally would have been like crushed shells or something like that. Obviously now this is quite a labor intensive technique, but that's part of the Zen ethos, if you like. The whole process is about slowing down and engaging with this layering up, this building up gently of one contemplative act on top of another. So, like these days you can buy Nihonga Japanese paints and they'll be pretty expensive, obviously, because there's a lot of work goes into making them. And they come in some beautiful one of contemplation and building, one on top area on top of other, rather than the more Western idea of oil paints which blend. These they sit on top of each other and they let the undercolor, if you like, shine through depending on the density of the color. Hope that makes some kind of sense. So let's look at some more contemporary ways that these artists have used these materials. This is a contemporary artist, and you can see how they look at the landscape. There's that flattening, but there's this beautiful ethereal quality which comes up from the building up of those Japanese pigments, one layer on top of the other. There's the reverence for the tree, there's the elements of the space, there's the specific details which are there, but it just kind of floats like a cloud over an area, and there's some real beauty in that. Same with this one as well, same artist. There's a kind of like ghostly qualities to it, or transient qualities, which goes back to the silk painting element. And the pigments just seem to flow or float over the surface. It's as close, what we've got, I suppose, as close as like watercolor, where you can get certain transient effects, but it doesn't really have the same kind of quality of these kinds of paints, which one area sits on top of the other, and the translucence of one pigment shows through under the translucence of another to build it up. You can see when the paint gets a little bit thicker, you get these beautiful radiant colors, but you can clearly see how different aspects are laid one against the other here. We saw in the earlier pictures how you had these different little scenarios being played out, or even those different aspects in the Zen garden, where you have an element of rocks surrounded by elements of water, which we represent in the gravel. You've got the different component parts put together here. One element component, another component of the rock, another component of the flowers, and hence, the different components of the yellows and the pinks, and then the birds built on top of each other, one on top of the other. And the other thing you don't see as well is a lot of the line, or the drawing quality, with an emphasis on the line. It's more an emphasis on shape, and in this case color. So there's a kind of graphic flatness, but it's coming from that kind of temperament of deep contemplation. And one face, well, it looks quite simple, but to try and do it, obviously, it's not. To get that kind of unity, this is a contemporary artist using a brush, these sumi inks, again, fluid inks on silk or handmade paper, and just putting the essences down, so that the whole piece then can kind of sing out in its own space. And this these beautiful images by this contemporary female artist. This almost like sums up Wabi Sabi as well, that the steer holding back, but to get the essence, the slight austerity of colour, like you saw in the rock garden. It's not highly saturated colour. There's a kind of melancholy to it, reflective quality, but there's a deep beauty, whether it be the essence of the geisha or the essence of transience through cleansing a certain kind of space, pairing something right back, right down to essential design to then transcend and create an element of stillness and reflection. Again, beautiful images. And then I thought we'd end with a contemporary artist that some of you might have heard of. She's probably Japanese most famous contemporary artist, Yayoi Kusama. It's interesting to see how she manifests her images now. They look in contemporary Japanese society, things went in a certain way very, very rapidly, shall we say. After the Second World War, they had to completely rebuild, of course, and they then developed something called the economic miracle. So the pace of society just shot up very quickly, but it shot up so effectively because of its roots, because of the discipline of the roots of the society, enabled collective work with a focus on something specific and to something to completely, constantly striving for perfection, to move so fast and quickly forward, enabled them to become a very powerful economic force. But then what happened, of course, with these speed of this change, all kinds of psychological aspects seemed to change in the Japanese psyche. It was like, as you saw, most of Japanese ancient art, and for hundreds of years, Japanese culture and the country was shut to the West. They had elements of nature, stillness, Zen, contemplation, wabi-sabi, etc. Put that into a consumerist idea where everything is about speed and constant transformation. It creates some very interesting dynamics, and Kusama kind of taps into that. You can see that what happened was this explosion of color, and she was interesting because she was brought up in Kyoto, which was the spiritual and artistic aspect and place in Japan for ancient traditions to develop. But then she found the restrictions in the patriarchal culture so overpowering, she went to America and she got involved in the 60s and 70s in these happenings and all kinds of collective work again. But then that created a kind of, what could we say, a real mental breakdown for her, that she couldn't tie those two things together in a very genuine, ethical way, if you like. So she goes back to Japan and then taps into her roots. She lives in an asylum by choice, and her studio's just down the road. But that's interesting because when you look at a lot of contemporary Japanese art, it's developed into something which is day glow colored, which is flashing lights, which is all about speed. And as you can imagine how that could easily tip over into a schizophrenic idea or approach to what your fundamental art is and could be. So I thought it was interesting to look at some of those contemporary artists that were making Japanese art in a traditional tradition, and someone like Yayoi Kusama, who builds these paintings with these brightly colored elements. You see this appear over and over and over, which now looks like something a bit very familiar for us, you know. Um, her paintings are covered in that kind of dot or blob or whatever you want to call it. You could probably think of another name for it. And then she makes these amazing installations. Now you can see this installation of light and mirrored glass, but you can see how it's rooted in the Zen garden. You know, you've got the flow of, imagine the gravel around here, you've got these rock spaces, these specific spaces, and then you've got infinity reflected in the mirroring quality of the Zen, where enlightenment is reached. That vast space is offered, but she's blended that very cleverly with contemporary culture of Japan, which is about sparkle, which is about movement, which is about technology. So the two elements come together, and this is a very popular exhibit which people can walk around and walk amongst, and then they become part of the piece as it kind of exists. So that's a little presentation of Japanese art for you there, covering quite a wide expanse of it. And just to sum it up, when you're considering it, maybe we want to consider the element of nature, as we saw its importance right the way through.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.